Yes, it's time to build a disgusting war machine with some classic Skaven minis. Welcome back to Anvil of Doom Miniatures. My name is Deets, and today's the day we dive into the rat's nest and we kitbash a cauldron of 1,000 Poxes using some old plague monks and the most rotten rat lord around, Skrulk. After reading my favourite book out of the Gotrek and Felix series, Skaven Slayer, which this grotty cauldron makes an appearance in, I wanted to kitbash, scratch build or craft my own, and after picking up this Skrulk pretty cheap off eBay, I thought there's no better time than right now to make my own and have Skrulk kind of commandeering this thing. I've seen some great scratch build cauldron of 1,000 Poxes out there, especially this one by David Rodriguez Garcia, and this is going to be my main source of inspiration because I haven't seen one better than this and it's an absolute gem. But anyway, that's enough ratting around, let's get into it. So this big old box of festy rats has the majority of decorative pieces that I'll need to make this thing work. And I was lucky enough to pick this box up still sealed, and to me nothing beats ripping that plastic wrap off. Now this box has enough sprues to make 20 characterful plague monks, but I'll only need 4 of these guys and I'll use them as the muscle to carry the cauldron and Skrulk himself. Similar to how the Saurus warriors carry a slain mage priest. As you can tell, there are a lot of great bits on these sprues to choose from, so I tried my best to choose heads, bodies and weapons that I thought would make for some good combos. Now the first little issue that I need to rectify is that the pole carrying arms are all on the rat boy's left, and I need to make 2 of these on the right. So what I'm going to do is trim off the weapons on a couple of the left arms and then do the same to the 2 on the pole carrying arms, and using my trusty pin vise, I'll drill a hole right through the hand and also drill a small pilot hole at each ends of the poles. Then I push through some wire and glue the pole on. Very simple stuff. Now maybe I could have just used some plastic cement for this, but as these poles and arms will be holding a platform up with the big gross pot and their Lord and Savior Skrulk, I didn't want to take any risks and have this thing falling apart. One other thing I did as well was drill a hole in the top of the pole and glue a straight bit of wire in, and this will hold the platform in place later on. Once all the converting was done, I then glued my plague monks together, and as I don't get to do this that often because the majority of the minis I work on are metal, I actually found this a lot of fun. Point I want to bring up as well is that the way these Warhammer Fantasy plastic kits are made makes them super kitbash or conversion friendly. If you're looking into doing some kit bashing for the first time, try track down some of these 2000s era Warhammer Fantasy boxes or some of the re-released Old World kits. I think you'll have a great time. Anyway, from here I lined up my plague monks with their future base, and then I took some measurements because it's time to make the platform that Skrulk and the cauldron will sit on. I'm using some PVC sheet which I got from my local Bunnings, and I'm going for a platform that's about 40mm in length by 35mm in width. I've said it before, but this PVC sheet is super easy to work with as you can just hack into it with a sharp knife, and when you slap some paint on it, it has no problems holding. Now that I have my platform cut out, it's time to make it look like a bunch of cobbled together planks of wood, so I draw some rough lines all the way around the PVC sheet with a marker, and then using my hobby knife, I cut out some channels along those lines. If you're doing this at home, obviously be careful and take your time. We want to cut the sheet and not our fingers. As I was working on this thing, I thought it was looking way too clean, so I cut out some large chunks on the edges here and there, just so it looks like it's had some wear and tear, or maybe these blind rats have run it into a few of the cave walls in the Under Empire. I can imagine Skrulk getting bumped and jerked around on top and being furious. Our cauldron carrying plague monk rats and the platform are now done, so it's time to tackle the main element of this disease-ridden war machine, the cauldron. To measure this thing up, I put Skrulk down on the platform just to make sure he wouldn't get in the way, and it's looking like I have about 20mm to play with, which is great because I can use a 20mm round base as my circular template. Now I'm going to be honest with you, this was the part of the kit bash I was most nervous about because making a round cauldron from scratch is going to be tricky, so I'm going to use some polymer clay for the bulk of this thing because it's super easy to work with. I got myself a big chunk of the clay, which is about 15mm in height, trimmed off the corners, then placed it on my circular template and began trimming off the excess sides to make it more of a rounded shape. I found rolling it out also helped with this, and when I was satisfied, I started to hack off the bottom evenly to make it look like half a ball, and from here I then gave it a smooth over with my sculpting tool. It wasn't as smooth or as round as I would have liked it to have been, and I did notice that I had a Plague Monk's mace bit left over, and it could come in handy for some details, so I pressed it into the clay all over to give the cauldron a kind of hammered or beaten look. The Plague Monk's musician had a similar effect on his gong-like thing, and I think this works well at hiding all my shoddy workmanship. I then threw the clay in the oven for a bake, and the bottom of the cauldron was finally done. But now I needed to give this rat pot some details, like some bubbling diseased ooze that this thing would be filled to the brim with. So for this, I'm mixing it up and using some green stuff, and then I'm going to throw a flattened sheet of this over the top of the cauldron and press in all sorts of wavy details with my trusty rat mace. It definitely needed some bubbles as well, so it was time to say goodbye to that beautiful round sculpting mace and cut off the sides into some dome-like shapes and press them into the green stuff, as they were the perfect size for some bubbles. This brew needed some extra spice, so I grabbed the half rat skull from the sprue and pressed this in as well, and then to give it a disgusting man-thing flavour, I trimmed off a skeleton arm from an old undead chariot sprue and stuck this into the green stuff as well. For the trim of the cauldron, I simply wrapped some green stuff around the top edge and then spent some time trying to make it look square. It's not my best work, but it'll do for now. Now we can't have this thing falling off the platform, so we'll need to have some poles and chains to hold it in place. I'm going to put 2 of these on either side of the cauldron, so I trimmed off some more of the Plague Monk poles and chained banners that were also on the sprues. I then stuck my cauldron onto the platform with some blue tack and got to work cutting the chains to length and gluing them onto the poles with some plastic cement. I made sure they were on slight angles because I wanted to look all ramshackles, and I don't think any Skaven engineers or carpenters would have used a level. I then glued these onto the sides of the cauldron, and using some green stuff I added some lashings and bolts where the chain met the cauldron. When I'm kitbashing, I like to add things as I'm going along, and I don't always have a thought out plan, and as the bulk of the parts are now done, it's time for the fun part and to make this thing look pretty, or mean, or ugly, whatever. Now using some green stuff, I'm adding some spikes to the rim of the cauldron, and after going back and forward in my mind for a few days, I decided to bite the bullet and also to add a banner to this thing, but I would have to extend the pole as it's going to sit too low and behind Skrulk a little bit, but that's absolutely fine. It was pretty easy to do. Unfortunately, I should have factored in the space for the banner on the platform, but as this was a later addition to the kit bash, I just made a little extension bit and glued this to the back of the platform. One other thing I did was drill some holes in the side of the platform for the bits of wire that the Plague Monk's poles go into. Now from here, I trimmed off all my extra bits that I'll glue on later, like a Skaven symbol, some little rat dudes, a warp stone, and some scrolls. Alright, it's time to get some paint on this plague infested pot, but before we do that, make sure you like this video if you're enjoying it so far, and maybe subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more videos like this. I've got a couple other kit bash videos which you might enjoy as well, so make sure you subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you want to jazz up your hobby space with some fantasy inspired art, head on over to my web store. These illustrations were drawn by myself and they all come signed and numbered, but once they're gone, so you'll have to be quick. The link is in the bio, but anyway, let's get back into it. Now, like always, I'm going to get the big parts of this thing out of the way first, which in this case is the platform and the cauldron itself. And as this platform is pretty basic, I'll give it a wood grain like look with some paint, and to do this I start off by giving it some longer lines that will go over the whole length of the platform, and as I go through my lighter highlights I make the lines smaller and smaller until I'm just applying a little bit of a spot highlight here and there. As the cauldron and Skrulk will be covering up the majority of the wood, I won't need to focus on putting too much detail in the center of the platform. I'm also going to apply these browns to any of the other wood-like areas, like on the cauldron poles, the rat boy sticks, and the banner pole. It's probably a good idea to make this toxic plague ooze super vibrant and kind of glowing, so I'm choosing my brightest greens first, but I'll give it a quick wash of warp lightning to pull in the recesses just so it has a little bit more contrast. I then work on stippling these lighter greens to less and less areas, and I'm going to mix in a little bit of dawn yellow in the end just for that final highlight, which I think will give it a massive punch. One thing I love about stippling is that it's super easy to do. You're basically just dotting on paint and anyone can really do it. I've seen plenty of people out there do this technique on minis, and I'm definitely going to give it a try one day. It's time to paint the banner, and I want an off messy mustard color as I think it'll look great against the green I'll later add to the monk's robes. So I'm starting out with my favorite yellow base, bronze flesh tone, then adding a wash of seraphim sepia over the top, and then I'll go back over some more bronze flesh tone and add in some flayed one flesh. This will mute the yellow a fair bit, and usually for my yellows I like to go super vibrant, but as these rats are a bit more messy, I'll try keep it kind of tame. The next larger portion I need to paint will be the true metallic metals, but first I smashed out all of the little bits and pieces like these little rat boys, and I have to say the highlight of the whole project for me was painting that mini plague monk. I love getting my greasy mitts on a good additional character, a scheming minion, or a familiar. They are always a joy to paint and add so much flavor to these Warhammer miniatures. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite extra little character is, and if you'd like to see a video in the future of all of Warhammer Fantasy's best familiars. I've been wanting to make a video about this for a while now, and I think it would be really fun. Anyway, let's get these true metallics out of the way, and I'm going to try and make them a bit more drab than usual, so I use darker, more muted metallic paints for my base coats like gunmetal and Hashut copper. I didn't want the Cauldron to be purely silver like the rim and the chains were, so to break it up, I'll make it more of a bronze color. After my base coats were on, I then hit them all with some washes like Nuln Oil and Guilliman Flesh, and then I got to work adding some highlights. One thing that I think is a win is that because I added so much detail to the bottom of the Cauldron, I was able to whip out the dry brush and save plenty of time painting it. I couldn't imagine trying to highlight this thing with a regular paintbrush. I probably would have gone insane. Painting true metallics really isn't one of my strengths, but I just try to treat them like any other paint and just go from darker to lighter, and I never ever use my good paintbrushes for my metallics. I have a spare set of cheapies that I use for this. So that's it for the Cauldron, and it's time to paint my precious rat boys. And as I said earlier, I'm going to give them and Skrulk some stinking green robes, as I think these will match up nicely with all their nurgliness. But while I'm doing that, let's have a chat about the Skaven and where they now sit in the grand multiverse of Warhammer. I hate that multiverse line, it's disgusting. Anyway, I've had a mate who's recently taken an interest in Warhammer and he's expressed some excitement in the old world setting. As we've played Skaven tied together and he's also played some Total War, he is a big fan of Skaven, but as we all know, the problem is that Skaven aren't being 100% supported in the old world. As of right now, they're considered a legacy army, which makes it tricky to start collecting and building a force of these rat boys. For someone new, it can be kind of daunting to think that what if I were to start this army and then next week GW pulls the legacy status away and stops supporting fan favorites like Skaven, Vampire Counts, or the Dark Elves. It's really had me thinking lately on what a shame it is that these guys are currently missing from the old world setting, as they are truly a staple of the classic Warhammer game and they are truly ingrained in the fabric of the old world lore and the balance of power, as they have been one of the biggest threats to not just the Empire but to the Lizardman and the Elves. And as I've been going in circles in my mind ever since the old world came back about what's going to happen with these legacy armies, I would love to know what your guys' take on it is. What do you think is going to happen next for the old world and moving forward? Do you think the rat boys will eventually make a comeback? I realize that being pushed into Age of Sigmar makes it really hard to predict what's going to happen with these guys, but I do feel like there is a way to bring them into the fold, maybe re-release these old boxes of rank and file kits, and for any additional new Skaven minis in the old world, maybe just keep them that kooky aesthetic. Maybe I'm delusional, but there definitely has to be a way to do it. Either way, GW will make some money. I have a feeling that Dark Elves could be possibly on the horizon, maybe after Kislev, but whatever happens and whatever armies do come back, new or old, I'm definitely interested to see the direction that GW takes in the game, and I would love to know what you guys think about that. That's enough dreaming and hoping. Let's wrap the painting up on this thing, and I'm giving Skrulk's book and the scrolls a wash of contrast medium and skeleton horde, and to make them have a tint of green ickiness, I'm glazing on a light amount of plague bearer flesh to the outsides of the paper and also to the deeper recessed parts. From here, I highlight with some screaming skull and some pure white to all the edges. Okay, so one of the last things we have to do is do a few freehands, and I'm going to do one on the banner, on Skrulk's book, and also on these little bits of paper that will hang off the Cauldron. I'm just using a super skinny brush and some dried bark, and I've looked up some Skaven runes for reference. I always find freehanding one of the best parts of painting minis these days. I used to hate it, but by pushing myself and getting better with my brush control over time, it's becoming a real joy. Moving on to the banner, and I'm going to keep this super brief, but I'm going to paint a gross, decaying rat head, and I'll start out by marking my dimensions by adding a cross in the middle of the banner, and then I roughly paint on a silhouette of a rat's head. Then, once I'm happy, I'll fill it in with some dried bark. I then add smaller details like fur around the silhouette, and then I start to add my highlights from dark to light, making sure places like the brow lines and ears are all highlighted. Usually towards the end, and when I'm finishing up, I add details like green eyes, a horn, and maybe some pox marks. If you want more details on my full freehanding process, go check out my freehand video after this one. And to wrap this thing up, I glued it all together, and it was pretty simple. I just used some scaffolding here and there where I needed it, and I also dabbed some super glue on a wire to get to all the hard to reach and tricky areas. And that's pretty much it. Here it is. Here is my Cauldron of 1,000 Poxes. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video, guys. I really appreciate it. And like always, I want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreons for making this video possible. I really couldn't do it without you guys. If you want to join the Anvil of Doom Patreon, the link is in the bio, and I look forward to catching up with you in the Discord. Anyway, guys, let me know down in the comments below what videos you'd like to see me do next, and I'll see you all next time. Cheers.